You're listening to the Emissary Authors podcast, where we help faith-driven founders and entrepreneurs tell the stories that matter. This episode was made possible in part by the Emissary Author Workshops and our title of the week, The Hope of War, from Emissary author Larry Cripps. Go to publishwithemissary.com/workshops and thehopeofwar.com for more details. Back with another episode of the Emissary Authors podcast. My name is Paul Edwards, my co-host Jason Todd, joining me again from snowy, well, I don't know if it's snowy, but certainly
it's
still
not
cold Illinois.
It is temporarily cold.
Temporarily cold.
I don't know. We had like 50 degrees up here. It's an odd time of year where the weather itself cannot make up its mind what it wants to do. And if the weather can't make up its mind what it wants to do, how are we supposed to? All right.
Well, I think that's part of what we're going to dig into today. We have another longtime friend of mine, a career with a fascinating career spanning several decades now in the telecommunications industry, as well as mentoring entrepreneurs, overseeing mergers and acquisitions and sales and acquisitions of businesses, and the author of this fine book, Ambition, Leading with Gratitude. It's a privilege to welcome aboard the Emissary Authors podcast, Seth Buechley. Seth, great to have you with us, my friend. How are you?
Doing great, Paul. Thanks again for the invitation. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
As are we. And, it's funny. We've probably known each other about 5 years now, ever since we've been in ISI together. And the very first way that I came across you, well, I heard your name bandied about. And then somebody mentioned that you had this book. And so I picked it up ahead of ever actually meeting you. And just for a kind of a comical intro to this, the part that has stuck with me the longest is this scene where you describe having an aha moment while using the restroom.
Yep.
What a thing to put in a book, but hey, it sticks, right? It has sticking power. So,
yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah, you get a little bathroom humor or bathroom moments in there and you've instantly got, that's the hook, right? Everybody needs at least one hook in a book. So you found mine. So good stuff.
But of course, this was about a much more serious topic, one that I thought was, I thought you did a fantastic job of being very open and transparent about how ambition affected you throughout life and how every positive or, every energy that we have has a penumbra, has a dark side to it. I think that's as we approach the topic of writing, as we approach the idea of becoming an author, I think it's a good thing to be aware of, to pay attention to the motives that we're entertaining and the objectives that we're going after, and just to be aware of that the whole time as you work towards publishing a book. And I'm curious to know. When you sat down to write this and you made that one of the centerpieces of it, what sort of perspective did you have then, and maybe even now, about that reality?
Yeah, I had always wanted to write a book. In fact, the foreword in the book, I give a shout out to an English teacher who gave me a good grade. She very rarely gave good grades, and when I graduated high school, she gave me a little journal, and she said, "You need to keep writing, right? Fill this journal." And it was inspiring to me. It was somebody I respected, even though I did not enjoy school, who saw something in me and kind of called it out and said, "You need to keep doing this." And so in my mind, I said, I wanted to write a book, but I also felt like, you kind of need some experience. You need to have something to say before you write a book. Now that may be shocking news for, most people, but it's not. Of course, you can do research on a topic and write a book anytime you want. But I felt as though for me, it's like I needed to have some experience and I needed to have a topic. And as I began to get invited to speak to entrepreneurs in kind of these co-working groups or, masterminds, when somebody would invite me, I'm like, what is the thing I want to talk to them about? And for whatever reason, I chose early, I want to talk to them about the downsides of ambition, the downsides of being a driven personality that often people aren't speaking about.
Yeah.
They'll talk about it at home, maybe, but they don't talk about it with each other. And so I started to, kind of articulate, this is what it feels like to be an ambitious, driven entrepreneur. These are the kind of internal discussions we have with ourselves. And these are the things that, we have to figure out over time. And so, I talk about, if whether you achieve something or whether you don't achieve something, most entrepreneurs wrestle with a lot of disappointment because they achieve the thing that everybody told them would make them happy, and they get it. And that emotional payout that they were expecting isn't actually there. And they're like, holy cow, what else are they lying to me about? Because that didn't scratch the itch, right?
Yeah.
Or we set these really big, ambitious goals that maybe they're even unrealistic. And then we crash and burn, and then we're disappointed we fail, right? And so either way, whether you win or you lose, you got to wrestle through the disappointments. And I had just found that not many people had shared that. And so, so I wanted to write the book. And then I knew at some point, these are the kinds of topics that I want to communicate about. And then I had just sold a business, and I had a bunch of friends around me. They're like, hey, buddy, you've been talking about writing a book for a long time. Either put up or shut up. And I was like, okay, let's.
That's great. It's funny how timely this is, because of course I've been going through that for a while. Some of the journey you're familiar with. And there is a learning curve in a myriad of ways that that you touched on there. You can achieve very great things, and you can find that you've long since surpassed the satisfaction level that can bring you, or you can set even quite realistic goals that would bring you a lot of the revenue targets you're after, whatever, and not achieve them. And my default response when that's happened is just to say, oh, well, tried that, didn't work. Guess I'll move on to the next thing. And we're actually sort of doing that right now with something that we've been working on, where we're saying, okay, we know we can't turn back and walk away because we know this is valuable, but yet there's more homework to be done. There's more awareness to be created. There's more of a respect for the realities of the marketplace that are just, frankly, don't occur to me naturally. Yeah. And I think that when you name those things, it starts to give people a sense that, oh, okay, there's actually more than one way to think about this than just simply, falling into despair.
Yeah, you're always going to learn, and I love to be a mentor, as I said. But part of the reason that I enjoy it is I've had some great mentors. My dad was a great mentor. The gentleman who started the consulting firm I now own was a great mentor. And one of the things my dad would say about new ventures, he's like, sometimes you just have to push into it. You push in, and then something's going to happen. It's a reaction. It's a learning. And then you process what you learned and you make adjustments, right? You can't just sit back and master plan it perfectly and anticipate that you're going to have an outcome. And so that's the thing with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the people who are like, okay, I thought about it. Maybe I got some counsel this time from people who know me and I respect. I'm going to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to figure it out. And it's been said that, confidence is really just your belief that you can figure it out. Right. Yeah. And that, as you get a little older, you get a little bit of that reservoir of, wow, I can figure this out. I may have to think about it differently. Right. I may have to, reframe it, but, sometimes you just got to go. You got to push into it and, see what happens.
Why was it important for you to write about the downsides of ambition?
Partly because I don't, I like to be original, frankly. There's part of me, I don't like to rehash things that other people had hashed. I also just think it's the position of empathy. I think people, it's been said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And, I want to be relatable. This gets back to motivation, right? If your motivation is to be, respected from a distance and, a lot of personal glory, maybe you don't do that. You want to be the sage on the stage, like they say. Or if you're like, no, I actually want to have impact. Well, that impact often comes from kind of empathy and being approachable and keeping it real.
Mm.
And I think there's a little bit of it is, we all know that relationship is about revelation. As you reveal your true self to other people, they respond, right? And you can get to play this game back and forth. And the fascinating thing about the book, which I did not expect, is the amount of, the response from people that were like, holy cow, I just finally read a book about me. And I gave it to my wife and I told her, you have to read this because you'll understand like how I think. And the level of connection that I get with people. And what's odd when you write a book, and your authors will know this when they write a book, or they already know it if they have written a book, is that if you will be honest and open in your book, people will know you. Now you won't know them yet, but they'll know you. They'll know you cold, which is a very odd experience because you come into a relationship, maybe it's a business relationship, wherever, and your trust level they have for you is already through the roof.
Yes.
But being the author, you still have to go through the discovery process of getting to know them and discovering that. So it's a fascinating but fun process.
Yeah. When people have read my book, and then they come up and they engage me in a conversation and they start talking about, all these things that they know about me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, how did you know that? Well, I read your book. Oh yeah, I forgot I put that in there.
Right. Yeah.
But it almost is, it does when you give them that level of access, you create an atmosphere of warmth and familiarity.
Yeah.
That then people feel very comfortable approaching you and engaging with you at a level they wouldn't if you were just perfect strangers being introduced or something like that.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of a spiritual thing. I think, I'm a person of faith, Christian, and I believe that, I'll pray, Lord, I'm getting ready to do a podcast, or I'm getting ready to do a book, or getting ready to do a speech. It's like, I'm here. Of course, I have some level of apprehension about putting myself out there, but I'm doing it from a place of service. I want to have an impact. I believe that you've equipped me to do this. Would you go before me? And then it happens. And frankly, I think the people on the other end of it are having, kind of a spiritual experience where it's not just about the author, it's about truth that the author is sharing that is being revealed to them. And so they're having this moment, right? And maybe if it's a good book, they're having multiple moments. And they end up associating that with you, the author. And, it's the wildest thing. And it's things that you wouldn't know until you get to experience it.
In the context of ambition, with what you're speaking about, you have ambitions to make an impact. You own a consulting company. You've done quite a bit of work with entrepreneurs and in business over the years. In your book, how do you deal with that topic of, Lord, go before me, and yet I've got this ambition that I want to achieve something? How do you split that difference or wrestle with those two, that tension in the middle of that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, I would say, has to do with kind of motivation, meaning my contention is it's hardwiring, meaning God makes people a certain way. And it's also nurture. The environment can amplify that. Like you've seen people that are just, you look at their body type. Michael Phelps is an example. You're like, look at his body and you're like, wow, that's like a swimmer's body. But then you look at his work ethic on top of that and you're like, well, he built that. And you're like, both of those things are true.
Yeah. He's
gifted and he doubled down in the gift. And that's kind of how I see it with being driven and being ambitious is, it's a gift, right? And it has some downside. It has some tendencies that you have to watch for, and that can be pride. It can be burnout. It can be entitlement. It can be stubbornness. It's like all of these things that, kids are a great example of that. You see these things that we have to wrestle with out of them, but we also know that those things, when harnessed properly, can be great strengths. And so that's kind of my view of ambition, is that, yeah, it can burn the house down. Ambition is fire. I write that, I think, chapter 3. It will burn your house down if you don't control it. But if you control it, fire produces great warmth and heat and energy to achieve great things. And that's the wrestling match. And it's, the answer isn't to suppress our desire to achieve, or to suppress our desire to do bold things. It's to harness the ambition for greater good, and with some submission and humility and understanding that it is a gift and that it should be deployed in the use of others. And kind of the punchline of it all was, a lot of times we use our ambition to find happiness. I'm just going to go to find happiness. And the punchline of the book is, for entrepreneurs, for driven people, achievement won't get you happiness. I actually redirect, because of the personal lessons I had to go through, towards gratitude. It's like, no, you have to be grateful for what you've already achieved and what you've already been given, as in gift. That's a starting spot, because then it kind of relieves you of this sense of, oh, my happiness will be tied to these great outcomes and these great activities that I'm going to do. And you're like, no. I need to be happy already because of all that I've been given. And then from that place of acknowledging all of that is true, now I'm responding. My activity is a response to what's already true. I'm not trying to create something to make me happy. It's like, no. I can already be happy because my happiness isn't found in achievement.
Yeah.
But I still need to work hard. I still need to have big dreams and big goals, but those are in response to what I already have. And that was kind of the epiphany for me. And that in particular, I knew that I had to share it, because my belief, by observation and experience, is that entrepreneurs really struggle with that. They're always trying to fill that bucket, and I don't believe it can be filled.
So
Go ahead, Jay.
there's the philosophical nature of wrestling with ambition, and that tension of, I want to achieve without burning my house down. I want to achieve in some sort of spiritually responsible manner. And not everybody wrestles with that also sort of philosophical umbrella, which I think is like a principle sort of discussion. What principles do I operate by?
Mm-hmm.
Now, underneath the principles are practical working it out.
Yeah.
Like, okay, what systems do I have in place, maybe to make sure that I don't burn my house down?
Right.
What do you talk about in your book in terms of the practical working it out? What steps should a entrepreneur be keeping in mind when they're thinking about ambition and how it's working its way out in their work or their life?
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. I don't try to stoke people's ambitions. I think that for the most part they're present. They could be stoked. I think it starts with our thinking, meaning, okay, how do you surround yourself with people who know you, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, so that when you have grand schemes, you can bring those to those advisors. So at a practical level, is surround yourself with mentors and advisors who can give you a sanity check on your dreams and schemes. Because a lot of pain for entrepreneurs in particular is because they want to get off into new, big, grandiose things. And they'll often do that before taking a good accounting of how it's going to impact what they're already doing, or how it's going to impact their family or their health, these things. And so there's a little bit of, okay, get some practical rules. I encourage people to get really clear on what they perceive their purpose and their potential as. Like, I had a coach one time, he said, Seth, you need to understand and appreciate the gift of limits. And I was like, whoa. He's like, you got too much going on. You got to limit it to just a few things that are the now things, and everything else you put in a sandbox for later. Like, that was the kind of feedback I needed, right? And I'm there all the time. I'm literally there all the time, which is, how do I peel back and do fewer things with a higher level of excellence? And it's It's a painful, hard process. But then when I boil it all the way down to the gratitude, I actually use kind of a framework that I talk about in the book. Not in just overt spiritual terms, but it is a spiritual process. And I would just think about God as a creator. Like, he built all this, didn't need my help. And I think about the beauty of what he created. Right. And then I would think about Christ's sacrifice, like going on this rescue mission to rescue people. And then I would think about my own forgiveness and receiving that sacrifice for payment for my own sins. And I would just kind of reflect on that. And then I would think about the various domains that I've been given as a dad, as a community leader, as a mentor, as a board member, as a church member, as a father. I already said husband. I would go through these domains and I would give thanks and I would just kind of think on them. And so again, just a high level, I think about God's love. I think about Christ's sacrifice. I think about my salvation and forgiveness. And I'd think about all these domains that I've been given the privilege of having impact. And that was a way when I was feeling anxious or frustrated or weirded out, stress, whatever we want to call it, anxiety, it would kind of reorient me. And that became what I would call my gratitude adjustment. And as I pondered that a little bit more, I kid you not, one day it just hit me. I'm like, that is literally the way the most famous biblical verse is laid out. John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his son, whoever believes should not perish, but have everlasting life. And that everlasting life isn't like in the by and by in the future. It's like right now. And so it just hit me. I'm like, the reason that framework worked for me is it was essentially me taking my will and my ambition and my worries and bringing them into the light of truth and saying, all right, I got to get my eyes back on truth. Okay, I'm not holding the world together. All the important things are already solved. Everything I'm working on is actually a privilege, not a burden if I approach it properly. I'm forgiven. Okay, now I'm playing with house money here. I'm not trying to go get something that's going to make me happy.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's as good as it can ever get right now if I will just walk in that. And so that's at a very, very practical level. That's the thing that probably made the biggest difference. And then once I got it in rolling, it's just a matter of reminding myself of what I believe is true.
There was a book, I don't remember what book it was. Paul might remember because I referenced it in my manuscript for the book I recently published. And the quote went something like, if you knew who was in charge of this world, you would see it as the safest place to experiment.
Yeah.
It's the safest place.
That was Dallas Willard.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I think you brought that to my attention, Paul.
Yeah.
And I think as I'm looking at this idea of ambition and accomplishment, producing the creative process, I think it's really a sort of the image of God on display. There's naming a future that doesn't yet exist, and then going about creating that future, creating new things to add to that, and then removing things that don't lead us into that future, the things that don't belong. And so that's the naming, creating, and destructive capacity of humans uniquely, which then in context of ambition is we want to go create it in our nature to do that. And so much so that it's painfully obvious when someone does not have ambition and they are odd man out. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, they don't do anything. They just sit around doing nothing. It's antithetical to who we are. We all just know it internally. So we embark on this ambition in this framework of it's safe to experiment on a eternal level.
Mm-hmm.
How do you wrestle with those matters when you're working with your clients or in your book?
Yeah. Just relief from this idea that I gotta hold it together, or I've gotta make it happen. If it is to be, it's up to me is actually something I fundamentally disagree with. Now, I agree you have to take initiative. I agree you need to move out, but having a sense, I'm working on a talk. I don't know where I'm going to give it because it doesn't quite work at churches, but I call it borrowed time, house money. Like, I'm on borrowed time. I don't own it. I don't know if I live tomorrow or not. It's borrowed time, right? So there's a little bit of urgency there. And then I'm playing with house money. So if I literally believe I'm on borrowed time and I'm playing with house money, how can I lose, right? As long as I can keep a posture of humility and frankly, obedience, but to move out with a little bit of confidence. And, I'll often talk about potential, and I think about this a lot. If potential is at the end of the road, it's just this vision that we have, big vision. There's two ditches on either side of the road. There's the ditch of fear, and then there's the ditch of ego. And I think that we, as ambitious people, I know that I've spent probably more time, I've spent more time worried about ego, meaning because I know I'm human, because I know I have pride and greed and all those things, it's like I'm always checking that box, meaning make sure you're not being that guy.
Yeah.
But the other ditch is actually a ditch of fear, which would be false humility and playing small because I'm actually scared that the Lord won't, show up.
Yeah.
I can think about examples in my life where I've played small, and I was a competitive wrestler. I was, very good in high school. But once, I would always cut weight towards the end of the season. I just never knew when I would. I would drop a weight class before I would go into the playoffs or whatever they call them. Yeah, district, and then not playoffs, districts, and then state if I was fortunate. And one year I was coming up against this school, and I knew they had a pretty good wrestler. And I chose before that match to cut a weight class so that I didn't have to wrestle that guy. Now, I never told anybody that, but I knew it. And then, of course, we have the big match. I just dominated my match. Big old picture in the paper of me flexing my arm, the guy's on his back, blah, 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 blah. And every time I saw that picture, it just reminded me, I'm like, you were a coward. You chicken.
Yeah.
It was a hollow victory, right? And so I think about that. That's playing small. That's, you achieved, great. You got your name in the paper, great. But in my heart of hearts, I didn't respect my effort because I knew I played small. So that's the other side of it, is if you're given ambition and you're given capability of achieving and accomplishing great things, you have a moral and spiritual obligation to have a little bit of faith and to go for it and to stretch and work through that stuff.
I think that's one of the reasons Jesus gives parables like the talents and scolds the people who hide it in the ground and says, you're good for nothing. I gave you something and you didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, yeah, but you hate it when I'm, you didn't want me to become proud. No, I didn't want you to become proud. I want you to do something with what I gave you.
Yeah.
Right. You're confusing the two. It's funny though that you mentioned wrestling, Seth, because this whole interview, I've been sitting here, this has been just stewing in my mind, is this quote, and I'm going to butcher it. I don't have it memorized, but C.S. Lewis was writing about it was either it's just a little ditty or a poem or some kind of essay that he wrote about somebody visiting the afterlife. And what they found when they got there was that the people who had gained access to the world to come all had a profound, like not a physical necessarily, but a profound spiritual gravitas towards them. Like they were just, when you talked to them, when you interacted with them, you could tell how much substance there was to them. Substance not born simply because they had it genetically or automatically, but one that was acquired in response to what they were given from the outset. And I think that's very much where a healthy biblical ambition ought to go. It ought to take the person who has it to a place where, going back to what we said earlier, you begin to go into situations where the normal tricks that the darkness throws at you to get you to give up, run away, chicken out, give up, surrender, say, never mind, it wasn't worth it, don't work.
Yeah.
And the reason they don't work is A, you say to yourself, I've been here before. And B, I know that the objective here transcends whatever tangible reward I'll get from it. The objective here is to grow into more of a mountain of a man than I am spiritually.
Yeah.
And that is what I think Lewis was pointing at when he described that vision he had of what the kingdom might actually look like. Is it's full of people who are so, just stacked to the hilt with substance and all of these wonderful attributes that go along with it, that they really are both irresistible forces and immovable objects.
Yeah.
And that's what I think really changes things for entrepreneurs of our mentality, our shared mentality, is we go into situations like this and the darkness can't scare us away. And so if we just keep pushing in, like you said at the outset, eventually we do hit pay dirt. And then there's no telling what kind of impact that can have in the wave, the dust storm, as it were, that we've created, how that's going to filter down to the lives of customers, employees, family members, everybody who is within our ability to hit. So how's that for a summation?
Love it. It's good. As you're talking, I was thinking about generosity, and we all know this. There's giving out of our surplus, and then there's giving out of our storehouse, somebody said recently. And I'm like, and then there's the kind of giving that's like, ow, this hurts. I'm going to have to be dependent upon the Lord for my needs in the future, which we don't like. We like to be very, self-reliant. The illusion of self-reliance and protected and all these things. And I see it kind of similarly. It's like, there's a ragged edge. You don't want to be irresponsible with your ambition, right? Mm-hmm. But you do want to be in a situation where there's some dependence. Like, hey, if the Lord doesn't favor this, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But also, if the Lord closes the door, I'm hoping I will be sensitive enough to not beat my head on it because He's actually directing. Right?
Yes.
Sometimes I call that special treatment for the hard of hearing. Is we will tell ourselves that we want to hear from God, and sometimes we think that's going to come in the form of a typewritten memo that we will carefully consider and then get back to Him, right? But often I find that the guidance that we're seeking comes in the form of disruption,
mm-hmm.
distress, disappointment, and God redirects us on that. And so we have to be careful. You got to be determined enough to push through it for the long run, because a lot of times the success comes from just staying in the game. But also sensitive enough to realize when the Lord is shutting a door and allow Him to redirect you to something better. And that to me is an interesting conversation, perhaps for another podcast.
So as we're winding down in our final minutes here, one of the things that I want to tease out of that is leaving our listeners and viewers with some hope, because I think there's this tendency in us to believe that there is some right way. And if I could magically find that right way, then all good paths open up to me. And what we're talking about in that is this idea of wrestling. When are you going too fast? When are you going too slow? When do you need to get off the exit? When do you need to get back on the highway? How do you view, and what would you advise people when they're wrestling with going too fast, going too slow, being too ambitious, being not ambitious enough?
Yeah.
Where is the Lord leading? Where's the Lord not leading?
Yeah.
Leave us with some words of encouragement.
Sure. I think first I would say it is something inside of each of us that we are surrendered. It's funny. I had this neighbor one time. He was a judge, and I'd always know he was present because I could smell his cigar. And I never really saw him in church. I think he went from time to time. And one time I'm just talking to him, and he was just talking about a struggle. I said, "What are you going to do about it?" He goes, "I think it's time I recommit myself to Christ." And I was just, well, and he wasn't talking about an outward thing. He was talking about a heart thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing is we know when we're surrendered or not. We're like, "Lord, I'm listening. It's all on the table. No sacred cows. I'll go left, I'll go right." Well, so I think it starts with a posture of I'm listening. And then I would say, don't listen alone. I've never said those phrases before, but I like that one. Don't listen alone. Find some other people you trust, be open with them, and there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors, right?
Mhm.
And so, just be surrendered. You don't listen alone. And then at some point, I have found lately one of the things that mentors have helped me with is they're like, hey, go for it. You've thought about it. You've talked about it. You've prayed about it. Go for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what we need. We need permission to say, all right, I'm going to let the big dog eat. I'm going to light the tires and burn the fires. Let's go. Because sitting in the middle and debating, am I going to go left or right? I think I've been a little bit guilty of that in the past. And sometimes you just got to say, listen, I'm going to do this. I'm not committing to do it forever, but I am going to do this all in. And that's some freedom too, where you can run with confidence because you've done the early work of posturing your heart, getting some counsel, getting a good plan. Now it's go time, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Those are great words.
Yeah.
Well, another fantastic episode with the Emissary Author podcast. The idea of ambition, it's so important because it's necessary. And yet too much of a good thing, like what we're talking about, can send all sorts of things awry in ways that we would be best to avoid. Well, Paul?
The book is Ambition. The author is our good friend Seth Buechley, joining us for the Emissary Authors podcast. I think it is worth a part 2 to discuss some of these more broad topics. For now, we're out of time. My co-host is Jason Todd. I'm Paul Edwards. It's great to have you with us, and we'll see you on the next episode.